My book problem is out of control. Last week I listed just the longevity books I've read, and there were 13. There were actually 3 more, but I didn't list them because they were expensive and they're mainly a compilation of scientific papers. And that episode was about a 17th, How Not to Age. And that week, Professor Colleen Murphy of Princeton, who runs a longevity study, released her book, How We Age, and I wrote a review of it on Amazon. And while on Amazon, I finally picked up this classic, The Longevity Project, about an 8-decade study. I love these books because they're so positive. Who doesn't like feisty old people?
What number of cigar is this for you today now?
This is my 10th or 11th cigar.
Hasn't your doctor said to you, now, George, you got
My doctor is dead.
And they read like whodunit novels. What's the most important thing? Staying active, a sense of purpose, friends, diet, genes, loving what you do?
Fall in love with what you do for a living. Terribly important. It's great to be my age and get out of bed and have something to do. I can't make any money in bed.
The Longevity Project scientists say their data clearly shows that it's conscientiousness, because conscientious people do all the things like following their doctor's advice. Colleen Murphy believes the data shows it's income, because financially secure people can afford fruits and vegetables and health care and don't have to work a second shift to pay the rent. I've always had the intuitive sense that happiness and laughter play big roles, but the Longevity Project scientists say, nope, that's reverse causation. The people who arrive at old age happy are the ones who were conscientious, which resulted in happiness. The episode about how not to age got a ton of comments, but I was surprised to see the comments that got upvoted to the top were about Peter Attia's book, Outlive. That book is different from all the others. 19 Jetta wrote, Chris, are you going to do a deep dive into Peter Attia's book? That would be so helpful. His points about sarcopenia are valid. I had to be on bed rest for 2 weeks and was shocked at the muscle loss I experienced. But all his emphasis on protein to extend life, as well as the need to do intense training to boost VO2 max, while I was reading, all I could think of was, well, that is not what the Okinawans are doing. It would be really good to hear your take on this book. The muscle loss during bed rest is shocking. The best thing I've heard about that comes from Professor Luc van Loon, who is a leading authority on muscle and protein.
Now, this is the representation of the loss of 1.4 kilograms of muscle. This is the amount of muscle that you would lose in a single week of immobilization, so bed rest. So you're not sick, you're still eating, but you just stay in bed for a week. And we believe now that the traditional view on muscle loss, like a slow, gradual decline in muscle, is not really what is happening. The reality is that people lose muscle in short periods of reduced physical activity, which they don't fully regain afterwards, and then net with every successive short period of immobilization or bed rest or illness, they actually lose muscle and don't regain it completely.
I hadn't planned on reviewing Dr. Attia's book because, being a scientist by background, I am drawn to the books written by scientists who conduct studies on longevity for their careers. I've followed Dr. Attia for as long as I can remember because he has very interesting things to say. I just never thought of him as a longevity researcher. But I did interview Dr. Greger, and he's not a career longevity scientist either, so... The thing is, books written by scientists rarely top the charts, and Peter's book is now number 7 among all books on Amazon. My suspicion is it got a huge boost from him being a YouTube star, getting millions of views on podcasts from Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Andrew Huberman, Oprah, and dozens of others, including his own popular channel. He's well built, he's a master at explaining things, and he promotes America's obsession eating lots of protein. Joseph1NJ commented, okay, I'll just say it, he's brilliant in intelligence, but borders on being manic. Although his views on diet seem fluid, some of it is questionable. For example, he eats 10 jerky sticks a day, advocates for animal protein for preserving and building muscle, and yet takes not 1 but 2 cholesterol-lowering drugs. His number 1 thing for health span, the number of years you're healthy, is exercise.
Exercise, the most powerful longevity drug.
When I was reading his chapters on exercise, I was thinking, wow, this may be the best longevity book I have ever read.
It turns out that peak aerobic cardiorespiratory fitness, measured in terms of VO2 max, is perhaps the single most powerful marker for longevity. VO2 max represents the maximum rate at which a person can utilize oxygen. This is measured, naturally, while a person is exercising at essentially their upper limit of effort.
Just to be clear, VO2 max is the ability to use oxygen divided by your weight. So people with the highest VO2 maxes tend to be slender runners, cyclists, and cross-country skiers.
A 2018 study in JAMA that followed more than 120,000 people found that higher VO2 max, measured via a treadmill test, the fittest people had the lowest mortality rates. Consider this: a person who smokes has a 40% greater risk of all-cause mortality, that is, risk of dying at any moment, than someone who does not smoke, representing a hazard ratio, or HR, of 1.40. This study found that someone of below average VO2 max for their age and sex, that is, between the 25th and 50th percentiles, is at double the risk of all-cause mortality compared to someone between the 75th and 97.6th percentile, essentially the top quartile. Thus, poor cardiorespiratory fitness carries a greater relative risk of death than smoking. But that's only the beginning. Someone in the bottom quartile of VO2 max for their age group, that is, the least fit 25%, is nearly 4 times likelier to die than someone in the top quartile, and 5 times likelier to die than a person with elite level, that is, the top 2.3% VO2 max. That's stunning.
I didn't know about that study, and I was very relieved because I have long been at the high end of VO2 max due to my passion for triathlon. And there has long been suspicion that it predisposes us to AFib and other heart conditions. There are scary TED Talks about it, which made me very concerned.
Veteran endurance athletes also have about a 5-fold increased risk of atrial fibrillation.
But Peter backed it up with an even bigger, more recent 750,000 person study that showed the same thing. But he didn't stop there. He spent a lot of time on the massive benefits of strength and lean muscle mass.
A 10-year observational study of roughly 4,500 subjects, ages 50 and older, found that those with low muscle mass were at 40 to 50% greater risk of mortality than controls over the study period. Further analysis revealed that it's not the mere muscle mass that matters, but the strength of those muscles, their ability to generate force.
I know, it's a personal preference thing, and a lot of people want a lot of muscle mass. More power to them, literally. But I prefer being lighter and speedier. And I'm suspicious that the bigger they are, the harder they fall and the more injuries they have.
Every time you take a step while walking, your knees are experiencing approximately 3 times your body weight in terms of force. When you're running, it's about 8 times your body weight. So losing weight has a very non-linear effect on your joints. And similarly, gaining weight in the negative direction has a very non-linear effect on joints. There's a reason that now I'm not that psyched about running the way I was when I was 25 pounds lighter. When I was 25 pounds lighter, my joints handled it effortlessly. Today, I don't know, I'd probably get away with it, but I'd have to really reduce my volume.
I'm 70 and I still love running in the hills, although I've had to be conscientious about my shoes, stride, and cross-training.
I also happen to be suspicious about eating all those extra calories and protein it takes to maintain that bulk, but we'll get to that. Every longevity book promotes resistance training, but Peter does it best because he's specific about things like grip strength.
I put grip strength first because it's something that most people don't really think about. Even I was surprised to discover that there is an enormous body of literature linking better grip strength in midlife and beyond to decreased risk of overall mortality.
Gustavo Gannett commented, "I read Peter's book and I loved it. I mostly paid attention to everything but the nutrition advice in the book, since I do not agree on that front with him. I liked very much the emphasis he places on exercise, so I learned a lot from it. Great book." And this is where the exercise chapters have gone from great to genius in my view, because Peter has developed what he calls the Centenarian decathlon.
Think of the Centenarian decathlon as the 10 most important physical tasks that you will want to be able to do for the rest of your life. I start by presenting my patients with a long list of physical tasks that might include some of the following. Hike 1.5 miles on a hilly trail. Pick up a young child from the floor. lift a 20-pound suitcase into the overhead compartment of a plane. These individual tasks are not out of reach. The full list is much longer. Once they've read it, I ask them to please select which of these tasks they want to be able to perform in their 9th or better yet 10th decade. Which ones do they choose? All of them typically. But now let's do a little math. Let's say the kid weighs 25 or 30 pounds. Over the next 30 or 40 years, your muscle strength will decline by about 8 to 17% per decade, accelerating as time goes on. So if you want to pick up that 30-pound grandkid or great-grandkid when you're 80, you're going to have to be able to lift about 50 to 55 pounds now without hurting yourself. Can you do that?
So on to the emotional aspects of Peter's book, which every longevity book covers. I can see where this section would be very important to a lot of people because Peter is very open about his struggles and demons and how he handles them. It just turns out that for me personally, his demons are not my demons. I have other ones, so I had a little trouble relating. I thought the emotional chapters were much better in the book The Telomere Effect, because the co-author is Elissa Epel, a professor of psychiatry, who has great things to say about resilient thinking, for example. It feels like the diet chapters were written by a completely different person, not the Peter of the exercise chapters. When I was reading this, I kept thinking about the book A Tale of Two Cities.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Wait. Which was it?
Sometimes when I'm out listening to him on audio, I visibly yelp when I hear him say some things. I'll give a few examples.
Most species do not even have ApoB. And as a result of that, most species are chemically incapable of atherosclerosis.
I can't even count all the studies on atherosclerosis that were performed on various species over the past century that gave us profound insight about heart disease and diet. This book, Hypolipidemic Agents, lists just some of the species: pigeons, swine, primates, rats, chickens, dogs, rabbits. The bottom line from hundreds of studies is if you feed them 25% egg yolks, beef tallow, or coconut oil, their arteries will fill with plaque, and if you continue, some of them will have heart attacks just like us. And if you return them to their normal feed, perhaps because their plaques are young, their arteries typically open back up in just a few years. Mark Armstrong did his landmark experiments on monkeys and produced photos showing how he could clog their arteries with 25% egg yolks, and how they fully opened after a few years of eating monkey chow without the egg yolks. There are papers about ApoB in swine from at least 1994. These are the studies that inspired Dean Ornish to conduct his famous plaque reversal studies in humans. In the few case studies I've seen where plaque reversal was dramatic in humans like it is in animals, the humans were relatively young, in their 40s. Here's another example of me yelping when Peter said something about diet.
The Minnesota coronary study was a 7-year study that was, I shouldn't say that. I think the actual intervention was probably closer to 3 or 4 years. I could be wrong on that. But it was done on patients in a nursing home. And, there you had the interesting situation where you had patients who were relatively old, therefore at high risk for ASCVD.
That one shook me because just one glance at the study and you can see it was conducted in just one rest home and 6 mental institutions. The largest age group by far was under 30 years, and the mean study duration of the participants was only 384 days, because 83% of the participants were lost due to political changes outside the researchers' control. I covered this study in some depth and will link it in the description. What shook me is the main way people hear misinformation about this study is from conspiracy-fueled podcasts and one conspiracy-fueled paper. I don't know where Peter got his information. HB92647 commented, "I stopped watching when you spoke negatively about Dr. Peter Attia. You lost all credibility with me at that point. I hope that's just me. Good luck with your video." I could cite a lot more examples of when I yelped when Peter said something about diet. So what is going on? I think it's 2 things. Here's the first.
I dread going to parties because when people find out what I really do for a living, not buying my usual lies about being a shepherd or a race car driver, they always want to talk about the topics I dread most, diet and nutrition. I will do whatever it takes to get out of that conversation. Go and get a drink, even if I'm already holding one, or pretend to answer my phone, or, if all else fails, feign a grand mal seizure. Like politics or religion, it's just not a fit topic of conversation, in my view.
But he does say this, and I think we'd all agree.
The standard American diet is what is killing people.
To me, it's like a politician saying he doesn't want to talk about politics, but that's a politician's job. I don't know how anyone can say it's the diet that's killing us, write a longevity book, and then avoid talking about diet.
Which brings us to my final quibble about the world of nutrition and diets, which is the extreme tribalism that seems to prevail there.
Is it really tribal? It is for people advocating a diet far from the Mediterranean, like super high fat or super high protein, or on the other extreme, 100% plants. But every food guide in every country and every professional society advocates for a plant-dominant Mediterranean-style diet, as do my longevity books. And I'm not seeing emotionally charged debates about Mediterranean diet recommendations. I didn't count Jack LaLanne's 90th birthday book as a longevity book, but Peter spoke very highly of Jack in his book. Their ideas about exercise are quite similar. But Jack was also known for his diet, a Mediterranean diet that included poultry, fish, and egg whites, but without anything from a cow or a pig. I don't remember anyone saying Jack was in a diet tribe. I think it's a be careful about what you wish for thing. If you're not willing to talk about diet and you don't host nutrition experts on your show, how much can you really expect to know about it? YouTuber Thomas DeLauer asked Peter a simple question.
Do you think that the blue zones, and can be absolutely anecdotal, your own personal experience with this, what's your take on that? I mean, is it much more of an outlier discussion, or do you think it's just the fact that they're active and they're healthy, happy people?
I was thinking, good question. Hard to avoid talking about diet with a question like that. We've all heard that one of the main things about blue zones is their plant-dominant diets like the Mediterranean. But somehow Peter managed to change the subject to the controversy over the causes of obesity, I guess because he just hates talking about diet.
You know, I have to be honest with you, I don't consider myself enough of an expert to really offer a meaningful insight into this. But I do think that it, in general, speaks to how multifaceted the problem of aging is. So I'll give you a much simpler example, which is just look at obesity.
I think the second thing is his disdain for nutritional epidemiology. He wrote, "I make no secret of my disdain for nutritional epidemiology studies. Between their reliance on weak methods, weak measurements, weak analysis, and weak reporting, I would hardly know where to begin in simply describing the problems with these study types, let alone identifying their possible solutions." But in the exercise chapters, he referenced lots of epidemiology and didn't question it. I come from earth science, where epidemiology is revered for figuring out the effects of various chemicals in the environment on human health, which I think is harder than nutritional epidemiology, and even I had more doubts about the exercise epidemiology studies Peter referenced than Peter did. Remember the study of VO2 max and probability of death? Peter's interpretation is,
when you go through these metrics of exercising or muscle mass or strength or cardiorespiratory fitness, it just dwarfs everything else, including diabetes, including smoking.
But here's how I saw it through the lens of a very important mantra in epidemiology.
William Farr made many important advancements in epidemiology during the mid-1800s. Another important contribution of Farr was the concept of multifactorial causal theory of chronic diseases.
VO2 max includes both your ability to use oxygen and your weight, a second factor. In endurance sports, we often say that weight loss is free VO2 max. So in the upper quartiles of VO2 max, you see slender people,
effortlessly floating away from the rest of the field.
Where are the obese people? In the lower quartiles. Just go spectate a marathon and you'll see this play out. A third factor, think of the healthy user bias. It's not very likely the most fit people are smokers. Diabetes is related to weight, so it's likely the upper quartiles have less of that. Kidney disease is related to diabetes, so it's not likely the upper quartiles have a lot of that either. Don't get me wrong, I'm all in favor of keeping our VO2 maxes as high as we can, and I wish the evidence was really clear that it dwarfs everything else. But alas, I side with my other 18 longevity books in believing it's a very important factor among many very important factors. You may be thinking, but Chris, those VO2 max tests had physical measurements, not questionnaires like nutritional epidemiology. Yes, that's a talking point of food giants who want to cast doubt on epidemiology.
And nutritional epidemiology is particularly fraught because it depends on people reporting what they ate.
But there are plenty of nutritional epidemiology studies that are based on physical measurements. For example, this one replicated and froze the actual meals of 12,000 men in 16 mostly rural communities around 1960, when they were still eating the traditional meals of their areas.
And here we see the olives harvested.
They sent the frozen meals to the lab to chemically measure the composition of various fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. Then they followed the men from those communities who were born and raised on those meals and had eaten that way until middle age. They followed them for over 50 years more, taking blood samples, weight, EKGs, and chemically analyzing their meals, etc. every 6 months. This is the rate of heart attack deaths by area. Note the rate of heart attack deaths in Japanese communities where they ate rice, vegetables, and fish were 7 to 9 times lower than in Finland, where they ate a lot of meat and cheese in those days. Second example, here is a very famous study from 1957, often quoted by the low-carb community to claim saturated fat isn't the boogeyman scientists claim. It was simply based on the type of food that was consumed in 22 countries back then, derived from import-export records, not food questionnaires. Lucky for us, these data were collected before the rise of ultra-processed food and the obesity epidemic. I have never seen anyone show this chart from the study, but as you can see, the countries that ate the most protein from animals had 4 times the heart attack deaths of countries that ate the least. How could epidemiology be so respected in every sphere of public health except for nutrition? I think Marion Nestle did a good job of explaining it in her book Unsavory Truth, how food giants skew the science of what we eat. I've interviewed her twice. Food giants do everything they can, which is a lot, to discredit epidemiology because it casts shade on all the biggest and most profitable food sectors: meat, dairy, and highly processed food. I have always wanted to find a simple, interesting book I could recommend about epidemiology, and I finally found one. Epidemiology for Dummies. The title makes it sound too basic, but it isn't too basic for the majority of people. Tony and I listened to it in the car during a long drive to bring home a rescued street dog.
At first I thought this would be one of those boring books that we listen to when we travel, but this one was different. It had some information besides nutrition, had some environmental stuff, and some diseases I'd never heard of.
When you're studying epidemiology, you may need to know the differences between a physician and an epidemiologist. A physician initiates the process in finding the cause of a disease in an individual. An epidemiologist initiates the process in finding the risk factors and the causes of a disease affecting a population.
I think if we want to stay sane, focusing on population health is a much more sensible thing to do. Letting short-term anecdotes and outliers influence us like they have so many consumers and even some doctors has led to a torrent of fad diets. Food giants know how powerful anecdotes are in marketing.
Kevin McGinnis from Nashville quickly became a viral TikTok sensation for documenting his rather, let's call it, unorthodox diet journey.
All right, if you don't remember, here's what happened. He vowed to eat nothing but McDonald's for 100 days straight. And let's welcome Kevin back.
Oh my God! Wow! Look at
what
you.
Are you
Who are you?
Whoa.
So what does Peter recommend? For a long time it was keto, but to his credit, he conscientiously observed his patient population.
I should note that my own solution at the time, a ketogenic diet, might not work for everyone, nor is it a diet to which I continue to adhere. In my clinical experience, about a third of people who consume high amounts of saturated fat, which sometimes goes hand in hand with a ketogenic diet, will experience a dramatic increase in ApoB particles, which we obviously don't want.
In every field I've been involved in, physics, chemistry, epidemiology, scientists are obsessed with the history of the field. I sometimes feel like I'm the only one who cares about that, and I feed my obsession with old historical books like these. When you do that, you find out fad diets have been with us for all of recorded history, and the same ones keep resurfacing under new names. The pattern is exactly what Peter saw with keto. It sounds great, but variations of it have played out dozens of times under different names, only to find out what Peter discovered. That hasn't happened with the Mediterranean diet, which has stood the test of time. Keto was designed to be high-fat, moderate protein, but Peter has shifted to a very high-protein diet favoring animal protein. And if there's one thing we know about the internet, that is a path to enormous popularity. The problem is my other 18 longevity books and virtually every professional society has grave concerns about high-protein consumption, especially from animals. No country has that in their food guide. I'm not aware of any well-studied, long-lived population who eats that way. For example, Luigi Fontana, a career longevity researcher who wrote a book I recommend, The Path to Longevity, has a well-respected paper in Nature called A Word of Caution Against Excessive Protein Intake. In a chart, he shows the optimal range between 0.8 and 0.9 grams per kilogram, below which you get muscle wasting and above which you get predisposed to type 2 diabetes, which leads to kidney disease. Every week I get on the phone with someone and take a long walk, and lately it's been kidney disease doctors and dietitians. They say one of the biggest fears their patients have is when they have to start dialysis, which is booming in America with dialysis centers popping up everywhere. They have to advise their patients to cut back on their protein intake because their kidneys can no longer handle so much protein. Those patients fear muscle wasting. Kidney doctors and dietitians have to tell their patients that many large, respected studies not funded by industry like this one show that once in the recommended range of protein intake, muscle wasting in the elderly is all about resistance exercise, not protein intake. YouTuber and PhD scientist Mish did a deep dive on that paper, and I'll link it in the description. Protein recommendations have a parallel with Peter's VO2 max studies because they are in per kilogram of body weight. People in the upper quartiles of VO2 max typically eat more calories to fuel their exercise and therefore consume more protein. And since they weigh less, it's very hard for them to drop into the muscle wasting zone unless they only eat fruit, which nobody does. Speaking of something not many people do, a lot of Peter's protein comes from eating deer jerky.
I get a lot of it through venison. So, Maui Nui, again, disclosure, I'm an investor in that company. They make a really, really good venison jerky stick, and I love it because it has no garbage in it. It's literally just got some natural flavors in it. I absolutely love the taste of it, so that makes life easy. And each stick, I eat the peppered ones, has like 9.9 grams of protein in it. I will easily throw down 5 to 10 of those sticks a day.
It has less saturated fat, and like the other longevity book authors, Peter encourages eating less saturated fat. But the ingredients piqued my curiosity when he said it was delicious, so I checked them. 380 milligrams of sodium per 55-calorie strip. That's 3,800 milligrams for a 550-calorie snack. The cured ham, pretzels, canned chili, bacon, and sausage I checked were all much lower than that. The only thing I found with that much sodium per calorie was pasta sauce, but you'd have to eat 3.5 cups of it to get 3,800 milligrams of sodium. I haven't heard Peter talk about sodium, and it's not in his book like it is in other longevity books, but I have heard him talk about blood pressure.
Okay, let's talk about blood pressure, because I think this is one of those areas that I've personally become more and more interested in over the past year. It's actually become more of a concern to me, maybe over the past 2 years, through the lens of the kidney. I don't think I've got a single podcast that deals with the kidney. The kidney is not uniquely, but exquisitely sensitive to high blood pressure. I'm not a nephrologist, and I don't think I remember much from nephrology, but I certainly remember that something about its vasculature is incredibly sensitive, right?
One thing I greatly admire about Peter is how transparent and honest he is about his own life and health. What he's talking about here is the rigorous way to measure blood pressure is to have the patient sit and relax with feet flat on the floor for 5 minutes before taking a reading.
I've been in sort of a back and forth discussion with my doctor and with my colleagues about, is this something I need to care about? Because now, if you look at my spreadsheet and all of my phone data, my blood pressure looks perfectly normal. For the last 6 months, I've averaged below 120/80. But I kind of feel like I'm cheating, Ethan, because to guarantee that it's low, I have to take 5 minutes of being calm. But deep down, I know my blood pressure is not 120/80 when I'm sitting at my computer, writing, because when I check that blood pressure straight away, it's above that. So
I think we should hear from a kidney doctor. So here's nephrologist Sean Hashmi, who's a regional medical director at Kaiser Permanente.
I'm sure you guys are different. Your patients never tell you this. My patients tell me, Doc, I never eat salt. And I exercise all day. In fact, I walk 10 miles every day. So I say, I believe you and thank you. And then I do a 24-hour urine collection where I measure how much salt that they put out in the urine, and that's how I know how much salt that they truly eat. So I actually do this, and that's how I can tell you when they follow a low-sodium diet and how dramatic it is. So what happens if you restrict their sodium? Something remarkable happens. The impact is equivalent to you giving them a blood pressure medication. That's why you should care about salt. But maybe you're like, hey, you know what, that's all fine and done, but we know that protein in the urine is the biggest risk factor for your kidneys getting worse. So if you want to know somebody who has kidney disease, how fast they're going to progress to dialysis, measure protein in the urine, right? That's how you tell. So if you measure protein in the urine, you find that if you restrict their salt intake, their protein in the urine goes down dramatically.
Another concern longevity researchers have is the heme iron in red meat, which is linked to reduced lifespan. I did an episode about that. I always thought of beef as the king of heme iron, but I see that venison is almost twice as high. Back to protein amounts. Chris, you say you speak very highly of Simon Hill, and he too recommends a very high protein diet. Yes, but most of Simon's kilograms are muscle and fewer fat. I don't think he's burning a lot of calories on long runs. And he does not recommend animal protein. Contrast that to the average American who has much more fat and much less muscle than Simon. If they weigh the same as Simon, do they need the same amount of protein to maintain their smaller muscle mass? What if they weigh 50 kilograms more and it's all fat? Do they need an extra 80 grams of protein to maintain their fat? People who carry a lot of fat tissue are already at elevated risk of diabetes and kidney disease, and longevity researchers say added protein increases that risk. There was a passage in Peter's book I didn't fully understand.
Unlike carbs and fat, protein is not a primary source of energy. If you consume more protein than you can synthesize into lean mass, you will simply excrete the excess in your urine as urea.
I think we should have Stanford nutrition professor Christopher Gardner clarify that.
Your trainer told you to do this. You ate all that extra protein, and it was a little more than you needed, or maybe a lot more, and you're going to bed tonight. So where do you think you put it in your body? Is it in your spleen, in your liver?
Where is my protein storage?
None. Every bit of it at the end of the day has the nitrogen taken off, and it gets turned into carbs and fat. So the muscle heads who are having a lot of meat and regular meals and a protein shake and a protein bar are turning all that into carbs and fats at the end of the day. In the end, it all comes down to calories.
So, after all that, what's my personal opinion of this book? First, I didn't mention the chapter on Medicine 3.0. I thought it was fabulous, A+, and well above my pay grade to judge. More prevention and screening, yes, please. Second, you know how much I love those exercise chapters. The only thing I didn't like is the very old idea that exercise dwarfs everything else. Jim Fixx famously promoted that idea in the 70s when he wrote the complete book of running, while Jack LaLanne was saying, no, exercise is king and nutrition is queen, and it takes both to have a kingdom. We all know the anecdotes of elite athletes like Alberto Salazar who thought their fitness meant they could eat whatever they wanted, only to have a heart attack from blocked arteries way too young. Epidemiologists say it's a significant population. Third, the chapter titled You Say Potato, I Say Nutritional Biochemistry made me yelp, because that's chapter 1 of the food giant How to Sow Doubt playbook that got us into such a confusing place. In the 70s, during the age of nutrition 2.0, when people were slender, people like Jack LaLanne were having great success talking about food because the studies were in, showing populations who ate foods like vegetables, fish, and bean dishes were much healthier than populations who ate a lot of meat and dairy. So the food giants changed the language to biochemistry, which hardly anyone understands. In the 70s, the language was, if you're watching your waistline, have strawberries for dessert and hold the whipping cream. Now the language is, I need to get 180 grams of protein into my obese body today. These plastic tubs of protein powder will get me there. Strawberries are carbs, and I hear carbs are bad. And the food giants cashed in because strawberries are not very profitable to sell because they are hard to transport and they go bad fast. So my answer to the question of whether this is the best or the worst longevity book is yes, I think it is.
It was the best of books. It was the worst of books.
It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity.
Boy, Stickins guy really liked to keep his butt covered, didn't he?
And there was a bloodthirsty clown who beckoned innocent children into the sewer and swallowed them whole.
That's a neat trick.